My name is Lila Monroe. I'm 26, clumsy on flat surfaces, allergic to office small talk, and until very recently, chronically underemployed. And yet, somehow, I ended up standing in the penthouse lobby of Reeve and Cordell Global, about to interview for a position I had no business applying for. I was 20 minutes late. My blouse was wrinkled. My resume had a fresh coffee stain blooming across it like a Rorschach test. And there was a receipt from the subway station stuck to my heel. So yeah, great first impression. When I shoved open the pristine glass door, I must have startled the receptionist into nearly spilling her latte. She glanced up, eyebrows climbing into her hairline. "Can I help you?" "Interview, executive assistant, Lila Monroe." "You're late." I didn't even blink. "And the train was delayed. A man spilled coffee on me, and your building has 2 entrances on Google Maps. I brought this resume, though, slightly caffeinated but still legible." The receptionist stared at me like I'd arrived straight out of a sitcom. "I'll let Mr. Reeve know." 2 minutes later, I was led into a room that looked like it belonged in a futuristic museum. Sleek steel, cold glass, and the man behind the desk? Alden Reeve, CEO, billionaire, infamous for replacing assistants the way normal people changed socks. No one lasted more than 3 weeks. Some barely made it to lunch. He didn't stand, didn't smile, just looked me over like I was a spilled drink. "You're late," he said simply, "and you're dressed like a Bond villain. I guess we're both consistent." There was a pause. Just silence and the slight tick of the modern analog clock on the wall. Then, "Your resume is crumpled. It's got character, like me. Incomplete degree. No formal secretarial experience. But I can brew coffee, tame office printers, and file legal papers alphabetically and emotionally. A for agony, B for betrayal, C for contracts that will probably end badly." He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. "Why are you here?" he asked flatly. "Because I've got rent to pay, a cat with a gourmet diet, and a talent for getting fired before lunch break. I figured I'd challenge myself." Silence again. Then he leaned back, closed the folder, and said something unexpected. "You get a 1-month trial." I blinked. "Seriously?" "If you survive, you stay." That was his actual word, survive. I nodded. Challenge accepted. As I left the office, tucking my blouse back into place and fixing my ponytail, I heard the whispers begin in the glass-walled break room. "She won't last the week. 3 days max. Did you see his face?" Inside the office, Alden Reeve twirled a pen between his fingers and muttered under his breath, "What the hell just walked into my company?" The next morning, I arrived at 7:59 sharp. The receptionist stared like I'd risen from the grave. When the elevator dinged open on the 32nd floor, 2 employees were already gossiping. "The new assistant starts today," one whispered. "Poor soul," the other replied. "Last girl cried in the restroom for 5 days before quitting via email." "Record 6 days," a third chimed in. "Left in the middle of lunch and ghosted." I smiled politely and kept walking. My desk was stationed directly outside Alden's office, a no-man's land between the battlefield of high-stakes corporate warfare and the cold silence of his domain. I spent the first hour color-coding his overflowing calendar, red for firestorms, yellow for egos, blue for whatever could wait till the apocalypse. At 8:15, Alden emerged. He froze at the sight of the color-coded folders. "What is this?" "A system," I replied. "Urgent, important, and borderline irrelevant." There was already a system. Well, now there are 2. May the better system win. He stared for a full 3 seconds, then retreated into his office with a sigh that sounded like the world's most disappointed cello. 15 minutes later, the phone rang. Reeve and Cordell Global, this is Lila Monroe, your friendly assistant. How can I upgrade your morning? Silence. Then, who is this? Lila, the new assistant. I usually speak directly to Mr. Reeve. I'll patch you through. Who's calling? This is Peter Dawson, Dawson Legal. I quickly scanned the calendar. You're booked Thursday at 3 p.m., but I'll transfer you now. I pressed a button. Or, well, several. A moment later, Alden stormed out. You transferred Dawson to shipping logistics. My bad. Too many buttons. Honestly, this phone needs a license to operate. Dawson is our top legal client. I smiled apologetically. Got it. Dawson equals important. Sales equals no-go. He rubbed his temples. And where did this folder come from? He asked suddenly, picking up the document I'd signed for earlier. Some guy in sneakers and a hoodie dropped it off. Said it was urgent. I figured, legal stuff. That was David Dawson, the senior partner himself. Oh. You signed for it? I nodded proudly. Lila Monroe, person in charge of letting nothing slip past. He opened the folder, skimmed, then froze. Wait, where exactly did you sign? Bottom line, why? You just authorized a clause that safeguards our leverage in the contract. Our lawyers have been searching for this loophole for 3 weeks. I blinked. I did... something good? You did what 3 Ivy League graduates couldn't. Boom, I said. Take that. Overpriced tuition. He walked back into his office without another word. I sat there, alone, unsure if I was about to get a raise or a restraining order. That afternoon, he found me trying out his office chair. What are you doing in my seat? Testing the lumbar support. For science. You don't have a password. Not exactly, but yours was easy. He narrowed his eyes. What do you mean, easy? Reeve 123. Classic. Come on, even my Netflix account is harder to crack. You guessed my password? I guessed 3 times. Alden. CEO Reeve. Then boom. Access granted. He stared at me like I was a walking security breach. Lila, you've broken 6 policies today alone. But I fixed the contract, I offered cheerfully. That's got to count for something. He said nothing, just waved me out. As I grabbed my bag, I paused. Mr. Reeve? He looked up. Thanks for not firing me. He held my gaze. The day isn't over yet. Out in the hall, I smiled as the elevator doors closed. Inside his office, Alden stared at the signed document again, shaking his head. She was a catastrophe in heels, but maybe, just maybe, exactly the kind of chaos he needed. Before I ever stepped into Alden Reeve's office, I'd already spent years perfecting the art of being underestimated. It started at home. I grew up in a house where success was defined by who could check the most boxes the fastest. My older sister, Camille, was valedictorian, homecoming queen, debate champion, and the proud recipient of every most likely to succeed award our high school had ever printed. Her trophies had their own shelf. Her college acceptance letters were framed. Her mistakes, if they ever existed, were simply moments of growth. And me? I was the kid who painted poems on her bedroom walls, who never remembered deadlines but always remembered birthdays. I got B's in math and A's in creative writing. I brought stray animals home. I cried during insurance commercials. I told teachers I wanted to be someone who helps people, but maybe not in a hospital because I fainted blood. My parents didn't know what to do with that. You're a dreamer, my mother used to say, with a sad little smile that sounded more like an apology than a compliment. And dreamers don't always survive the real world. Camille went to Princeton. I went to community college. She got a dual degree in law and finance. I dropped out halfway through my business admin course when my roommate moved out and I couldn't afford rent. "You just don't finish things," my dad once said during a Thanksgiving dinner that ended in silence and cranberry sauce on the carpet. "You start, and then life gets inconvenient and you give up." But that wasn't the truth. I didn't give up. I adapted. I worked night shifts. I took care of a friend's toddler for cash under the table. I hustled. I made things work. Messily, imperfectly, but still, I was always the lesser option. The plan B, the quirky one who was fun at parties but not very focused. By the time I hit 25, I'd worked 12 jobs: barista, dog walker, admin temp, freelance blog writer for a website that sold anti-aging cream. None of it stuck, or rather, none of them gave me the space to stick. And when the listing for executive assistant to Alden Reeve popped up on my job board feed, I wasn't thinking about ambition. I was thinking about bills, about needing a steady paycheck, about the kind of job that might not make me cry in the bathroom between shifts. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that behind the sterile title and impossible reputation was a man surrounded by yes people, guarded by rules, and silently drowning in his own routines. And I, Lila Monroe, with my sticky notes and cinnamon lattes and terrible timing, was about to become the most inconvenient miracle he never saw coming. But that first week, it was still survival mode. Every glance from him felt like a pop quiz. Every file I touched felt like a bomb that might detonate if I color-coded it wrong. And the rest of the staff? Let's just say they weren't thrilled that the human tornado had gotten past the front gate. "I give her a week," someone muttered near the coffee machine when they thought I couldn't hear. "She looks like she got dressed in the dark. How long before she cries?" And yet, I didn't cry. I showed up every single morning, early, with coffee, with effort, with the ridiculous hope that maybe, just maybe, this time someone would see past the chaos and realize there was something else underneath. Not perfection, but grit. Not polish, but persistence. I wasn't built for perfect systems. I was built for survival. And Reeve and Cordell, they were about to find that out the hard way. They didn't say it outright, but it was everywhere. In the tight-lipped nods from the HR director, in the raised eyebrows when I asked simple questions, in the strained silence that filled the air when I entered a meeting to drop off a folder. I was a placeholder, just another assistant on the assembly line. One more doomed experiment in Alden Reeve's ever-revolving door of executive support. On my third day, I found a list taped inside a locked drawer of my desk. It looked like a checklist, but the items weren't about tasks or protocol. No, these were names. Dates beside them. Some were scribbled in red pen with dramatic underlines. Amanda P., 3 weeks. Patricia L., 2 weeks. Susan R., 6 days. Jolene T., left during lunch, didn't return. Nina F., cried in the elevator. Rita W., made it today. 1.5. It was like someone had created a ghost log, a tribute to every assistant who came before me and lost the battle. And above the names, one line in all caps: "If you're reading this, run." I sat back in the chair and stared at the list, wondering what each woman had gone through. Were they like me, quirky, strong-willed, desperate? Did they walk in thinking they could handle Alden Reeve? Because if so, I was already repeating the same mistake. That day, I made another mistake, this time with the coffee delivery schedule. I sent a welcome package meant for an incoming investor to our janitorial vendor, and the guy ended up with a $100 bottle of scotch and a thank you card from Alden. I expected fireworks. Instead, Alden looked at the report, glanced at me, and muttered, "Well, At least the janitor had a good day. It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't fury either. I called it progress. Still, I didn't let my guard down. Not when every other assistant had been flattened by the weight of perfection. Because Alden didn't just want competence. He wanted silence, clean lines, predictable outcomes. And that's not what I brought into his world. What I brought was questions. Like, why is this team meeting scheduled over lunch if none of you are eating? Or, why does this filing system look like it was organized by someone who's afraid of color? Or, once, has anyone ever told you you manage like a traffic light stuck on red? He never laughed. But he didn't fire me either. What he did do, oddly enough, was stop correcting me. That Friday, I found a Post-it on my desk. Call Johnson back. Good catch on the clause discrepancy. A. That was it. No thank you. No signature. Just the initial. But in Alden speak, that was a standing ovation. And that's when I realized something else. The previous assistants, they didn't fail because they weren't capable. They failed because they tried to be invisible. Perfect little shadows who never disrupted the pattern. I wasn't built for shadows. And Alden, for all his stoicism, wasn't built to recognize someone unless she forced her way into his field of vision. I was loud, offbeat, accident-prone, but I was impossible to ignore. And maybe that was the point. The murmurs didn't stop, though. I heard them in the elevator, in the copy room, even in the bathroom stalls when people assumed I wasn't in the next stall over. She's not like the others. No, she's worse. She doesn't know her place. She's lucky she hasn't been escorted out by now. I carried all of it home. At night, I sat in my apartment, a cramped little shoebox with water-stained walls and a heater that whined like a sick violin, and I wondered how long I'd last. I didn't have the credentials, I didn't have the poise, I didn't have the fashion sense or the network or the pedigree. But I had one thing no one else did. I stayed. Even when it was hard, even when I wanted to scream, even when the world around me said, "You do not belong here," I kept showing up. And for the first time in a very long time, I began to believe that maybe being different wasn't my weakness. Maybe it was my power. It was my 6th day when someone finally spoke to me like I was more than just a misplaced temp. Her name was Elise. Quiet, mid-40s, glasses perched perpetually at the end of her nose, and a wardrobe of cardigans that looked like they belonged to someone's wise aunt. She worked in compliance, buried in spreadsheets, audits, and documents no one else wanted to read. Most people passed her by like wallpaper, but I noticed her because she noticed me. She stopped by my desk just after lunch, holding a folder I'd accidentally misrouted the day before. "This goes to the tax team," she said gently, placing it down. I cringed. "Sorry, I'm still learning the maze." "You're not the first," she smiled, "and I doubt you'll be the last." Then, without asking, she placed a chocolate bar beside the folder. "Emergency sugar," she added, "for days when your brain hits a wall." That moment, it shouldn't have meant much, but it did. Because in a building full of suits and sharp tongues, she offered something that felt dangerously close to kindness. "Thanks," I said, a little stunned. "I needed that." She sat in the chair across from me, ignoring the unwritten rule about how long people could linger outside the CEO's office. "I saw you in the meeting with the procurement team," she said, her voice soft but precise. "You caught the mistake in their vendor report. That was sharp." "I think they hated me for it." "They'll get over it." Alden noticed. I raised an eyebrow. "You call him Alden?" Elise smiled knowingly. "I've been here long enough to earn that privilege." Her eyes held something curious, not pity, not warning, recognition, like she saw past my stained resume and awkward humor and knew exactly what I was doing. "You remind me of someone," she said quietly. "My younger self, maybe. Back when I thought being underestimated was a curse. And now? It's a weapon, if you know how to use it." I stared at her, words catching in my throat. That was the first time someone didn't tell me to change, to adapt, to dim myself down for the sake of fitting in. Instead, she told me to sharpen the edges I'd been told to sand off. She stood to leave, but before she did, she looked back at me with the smallest grin. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't flinch. After she left, I stared at the chocolate bar for a long moment, then put it in the top drawer of my desk. It stayed there for days, unopened, a symbol, not of sugar, of strength. That afternoon, I made another blunder. I sent the wrong financial summary to a board member. Alden found out within 10 minutes. He didn't yell, but his jaw clenched in that way that made the room feel 10 degrees colder. "I trusted you with this," he said flatly. "And I take full responsibility," I replied, already grabbing the corrected file. "It's fixed. I called the board member. I explained. They're updated and reassured." He stared at me. "Next time, double-check." "I already triple-checked the next 3 reports." I paused, then added, "I'm not perfect, Mr. Reeve, but I don't repeat mistakes." He said nothing, just returned to his desk. But later that day, I noticed something on my calendar. A 15-minute meeting had been added at 8:00 a.m. the next morning. Title, Process Alignment. With Alden. I'd never been invited to his calendar before. That meant something. Elise was right. They didn't know what to do with someone who didn't flinch. But Alden, he was starting to notice, maybe not with praise, but with proximity. And in this company, that was step 1. The meeting with Alden was scheduled for 8:00 a.m. sharp. No buffer, no agenda, just one calendar event that might as well have read, "Prepare to be dissected." I arrived 15 minutes early, not because I was trying to impress him, but because my nerves were staging a coup. I double-checked the documents I'd prepared, straightened my notepad, and stared at the blinking cursor on the login screen like it owed me answers. When Alden finally emerged from his office at exactly 8:00 a.m., his expression was unreadable as always. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask how I was. He simply gestured toward his office door. Inside, it felt colder than usual. Or maybe that was just me sweating. He sat, gestured for me to do the same, and said, "Let's talk about your process." "Which part?" I asked, flipping open my notebook. "The part where I mess things up and fix them fast? Or the part where I guess people's passwords in under 3 tries?" A faint twitch of his lip. "Your morning routines? Your workflow? How you manage my schedule?" I hesitated, unsure if this was a trap. "I look for patterns," I began, "where there are bottlenecks, overlapping meetings, time gaps that you never actually use because you're always pulled into something else." I handed him a page I'd printed, a reorganized version of his calendar with color blocks and categories. "This," I said, "is what your week could look like if we trimmed non-essential calls, moved internal check-ins to bi-weekly, and carved out 2 hours a day where no one can book you unless it's urgent." He stared at it, then at me, then back at the page. "I've been trying to implement something like this for 2 years, he muttered. "Then maybe you need fewer Harvard MBAs and more caffeine-fueled weirdos with highlighters." That got him. A smirk, not a full smile, just a flicker. But it was real. "Is that how you see yourself?" he asked. "As a highlighter-wielding weirdo? Absolutely. I come in bold colors and occasionally leak ink." He sat back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You're unorthodox." "Thank you." That wasn't a compliment. I accepted it anyway. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt charged, like we were slowly rewriting the language we used to speak to each other. He tapped the calendar page. "Implement this. Let's see what happens." "Yes, sir." "Oh, and Monroe?" "Yeah?" "Next time, don't send my scotch to the janitor." I grinned. No promises. As the week progressed, something unexpected started happening. People stopped pretending I didn't exist. It was subtle at first, a nod from a senior exec in the hallway, an email from a department head actually thanking me for catching a scheduling error. Even the receptionist, who had initially watched me like I was a suspicious package, started asking if I wanted sugar in my coffee. I wasn't part of the inner circle, not even close, but I was no longer invisible. And Alden, he changed too. Not dramatically. He still barked orders, still shut his door when he wanted silence, still typed like he was at war with the keyboard. But every so often, he'd ask for my opinion. Like the day the West Coast Division sent a proposal that looked off. "What do you see here?" he asked, sliding it across his desk. I skimmed the page. "These numbers are too optimistic. They're predicting growth that isn't backed by the market trend, and they buried the cost projections in footnotes." He didn't correct me. He didn't scoff. He nodded and said, "Good catch." 2 words. But from Alden Reeve, it felt like receiving a handwritten letter from a stone statue. The night I truly understood how far things had shifted came after a particularly long Tuesday. I stayed late to finish a set of reports. The office was nearly empty, just me, a flickering light in the copy room, and the hum of the city outside. Alden's door opened. I didn't look up. "Why are you still here?" he asked. "Because numbers don't file themselves." He paused. Then, "Have you eaten?" I blinked, finally glancing up. "Is that concern?" "It's logistical," he deadpanned. "If you collapse from hunger, I'll have to find a replacement. Again." Touching. He held up a takeout bag. "I ordered too much." "You never order too much. You calculate servings by decimal points. It was an accident. You don't make accidents." He rolled his eyes and dropped the bag on my desk. "Eat, Monroe." "Thank you, Alden." He looked at me, then nodded once before walking away. I opened the bag. Spicy noodles, my favorite. No one had asked. No one could have known. But somehow, he did. By the time I reached the end of my second week, the whispers had changed their tone. They still whispered, of course. That never stopped in a place like Reeve and Cordell. But now it wasn't, "She won't last," or "She's another Amanda." Now it was, "She got the CEO to change his calendar." She speaks to him like they're equals. She corrected his quarterly projection in front of legal, and he thanked her. They didn't understand it. Honestly, neither did I. I was still the girl with a resume soaked in espresso and a habit of saying things I should keep in my head. I still talked too fast when I was nervous, still tripped over office rugs that weren't even raised. But somehow, I had made it through the silent filters of a company built on tradition and structure, and I'd cracked open something no one else had dared touch, Alden Reeve's trust. But cracks, no matter how small, invite pressure, and pressure always calls the storm. It started on a Thursday, a quiet one, the kind of day that smells like tension before it arrives. Alden had a meeting with the board. I had prepped everything: financial updates, legal briefs, projections down to the decimal. I even printed them on the heavy, pretentious paper that screamed serious business. Everything should have gone smoothly. It didn't. One of the board members, Harold Whitaker, a man whose smile looked like it had been trained in a mirror, brought up a rumor about a potential merger with a tech firm in London. A rumor that hadn't passed through me, a conversation I hadn't been looped in on. That meant one thing: they didn't trust me yet. Or worse, someone inside wanted to remind Alden that I was still just the assistant. "Your secretary," Harold said, in that tone people use when they mean servant, has been unusually involved in recent executive decisions. Are we relaxing our standards now?" The room went quiet. I wasn't even in the room, but I heard about it within the hour. From Elise. She came to my desk, set down her usual folder, and her eyes told me everything. "They challenged you?" She nodded. "In front of everyone, tried to make it sound like you were compromising internal boundaries." I swallowed hard. "Did Alden say anything?" Elise paused, then smiled, almost proudly. He said, and I quote, "Miss Monroe's instincts have saved this company twice in 2 weeks. If you want to talk about standards, let's start there." I blinked. "He called me Miss Monroe?" "And he made eye contact when he said it. That's practically a hug coming from him." I laughed, but it came out tight, forced, because the more visible I became, the more I realized how much weight visibility carries. When you're invisible, they underestimate you. When you're seen, they come for you. I wasn't scared. Not really. But I knew what it meant. I had stepped into a system designed to reject deviation, and now I wasn't just surviving. I was rewriting the rules. That evening, as the office began to empty, Alden stepped out of his office and leaned on the edge of my desk. "We'll need a strategy brief by Monday," he said. "I already started it," I replied, pulling up the document on my screen. He nodded, paused, then added, "Ignore Whitaker." So he knew. "Does it bother you?" I asked. "That they question your decisions because of me?" "No. But it makes your job harder." "Yes. So why keep me?" He studied me for a long moment. Then quietly, "Because I'd rather fight with you on my side than waste time cleaning up after people who only tell me what I want to hear." I stared at him. He wasn't smiling, but his voice held something I hadn't heard before. Conviction. "You know I don't fit the mold," I whispered. "I'm not asking you to," he replied. And that was the moment I understood the strange alliance forming between us. I was chaos. He was order. I was noise. He was silence. But somewhere in between, we met at truth. Honesty, challenge, respect. He didn't need another shadow behind his desk. He needed a mirror, someone to reflect back what others wouldn't say, even if it came wrapped in sarcasm, Post-it notes, and lattes with too much vanilla. That weekend, I didn't rest. I went through months of company records, contract archives, and expense reports, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to understand the machine I was now a part of. And that's when I found it. A duplicate invoice, a small one, just $620, but duplicated 3 times, from a vendor who was supposed to be contracted for a single installation. At first, I thought it was a clerical error. But the deeper I dug, the more I saw the pattern. Triple charges, inflated figures, ghost transactions. Someone inside was skimming off the top, and it had been going on for months, maybe longer. I stared at the screen, pulse racing. I had stumbled onto something real, something dangerous, something that, if I brought it to light, would either elevate me or get me escorted out with a cardboard box. I looked at the clock, 11:42 p.m., then I looked at my inbox. I opened a blank message. Subject, urgent, irregular vendor activity. Recipient, Alden Reeve. And with one breath, I hit send. I sent the email just before midnight on a Saturday. No subject line fluff, no emojis, no disclaimers, just the facts. 3 identical invoices from a vendor that was supposed to do a single office renovation job 6 months ago. The charges were small enough not to raise alarms, but multiplied over time, they'd quietly siphoned thousands from Reeve and Cordell's budget. The emails were attached. The payment logs were screen-clipped. Every breadcrumb I could find. I ended it with a single sentence. This could be an error, or it could be deliberate. Either way, someone should know. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I expected Alden to reply at 2 a.m., though let's be honest, it wouldn't have shocked me, but because I understood the risk I had just taken. No one asked me to go digging. No one assigned me an audit. I had crossed an invisible line in corporate hierarchy, the line between staying in your lane and seeing too much. And seeing too much is dangerous, especially when you're still on probation. Sunday passed with no word. I checked my inbox every hour, refreshed the screen until I thought the mouse might break. By Monday morning, I'd convinced myself I'd gone too far. He would call me into his office. He would say I had overstepped. He would thank me, formally, and then HR would be CC'd on the goodbye email. But that didn't happen. At 7:58 a.m., Alden walked into the office like always, phone in one hand, black coffee in the other. He passed my desk without a glance. By 8:05, I was pacing. By 8:12, I was drafting an apology in my head. And then at 8:17, my screen pinged. One new message. Subject: Vendor investigation. From Alden Reeve to Lila Monroe. Meet me in conference room 4A. Now. Just 3 words in the body of the email. Bring everything. The air in conference room 4A was sharp, like someone had opened the windows just to remind us it was winter. The blinds were half drawn. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly overhead. Alden was already there. He stood at the end of the table, arms folded, suit crisp, jaw tighter than I'd ever seen it. "LaSalle Renovations," he said as I entered. "You're sure?" "As sure as the audit trail let me be without access to deeper accounting systems," I replied, placing the printouts on the table. "I traced the payment as back 6 months. The vendor name is legitimate, but the invoice numbers? They're ghosting through 3 departments." "And nobody caught this?" I shook my head. "If they did, they didn't say anything." He scanned the documents with the precision of a machine. "You know what this looks like, don't you?" he said finally. "Fraud. Inside job." He looked at me then, really looked. "You realize what you've just uncovered could lead to an internal audit, multiple firings, and possibly legal charges?" I hesitated. "I didn't plan to dig this deep," I admitted. "I was just curious why something felt off." His eyes narrowed. "Curious?" "Okay, nosy." He said nothing for a long beat, then turned back to the documents. "This doesn't leave this room, not until I verify everything with our legal team." "Understood." He paused. "I'll need you to stay quiet about this, Monroe." I nodded slowly. "That won't be a problem." And it wouldn't be. Except, of course, that it already was. Because somewhere in the building, someone else had noticed what I had clicked into that weekend. And they weren't going to stay quiet. They were going to fight back. And I was their newest threat. Tuesday morning felt off. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. Nothing was obviously wrong, but I could feel it. The shift. Like the air had thickened just enough to make breathing a conscious effort. It started with silence. People who used to toss half-hearted mornings in the hallway now kept walking. The receptionist, usually friendly, didn't offer her usual smile when I arrived. Even the accounting guy, Ray, the one who always asked about my weekend, looked away when I passed his desk. At first, I chalked it up to imagination. Paranoia, maybe. But then came the email. Subject: urgent. Performance review. Notice from HR. Deptin. To Lila Monroe. Please report to HR at 3:00 p.m. today to discuss recent behavior affecting workplace morale and departmental trust. A formal complaint has been logged. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. A complaint? What complaint? I reread the email 3 times, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I thought of replying, demanding context, demanding names. But I already knew. This wasn't about missed tasks or actual misconduct. This was retaliation. Someone knew I had stumbled onto the LaSalle fraud, and now they were trying to bury me before I could dig further. I walked into the HR office at 2:59 on the dot. The woman behind the desk, Carla, short bob, impeccable nails, offered a practiced smile. "Lila, thank you for coming. Please sit." Her voice was too smooth, too rehearsed. I could almost hear the script running behind her eyes. "We've received concerns regarding your access of internal vendor files," she said, folding her hands neatly, "as well as reports that you've been discussing sensitive information with individuals outside of your department." "I haven't," I said flatly. "No conversations at all?" "Not outside of my direct supervisor." Carla's lips twitched. "Mr. Reeve?" I nodded. "He's the one who asked me to bring him the information." She didn't respond right away, just clicked her pen, once, twice. "Unfortunately, we've also been alerted to inconsistencies in your recent time entries, including a claim that you accessed the office after hours without authorization." I felt my stomach drop. "This is a setup," I said, almost before the words formed. "I'm just here to ask questions, Lila." "No, you're not. You're here because someone wants to derail this before it explodes." Her composure wavered. "You'll need to submit a written statement." "Gladly," I said, standing, "and I suggest you read mine before someone here ends up in front of a judge." As I left, I caught sight of a man in a dark blazer down the hallway, leaning against a doorframe, arms crossed, watching. He wasn't from HR. He wasn't from my floor, but I'd seen him once before, in the vendor records room. That was no coincidence. Back at my desk, I sat motionless for several minutes. Part of me wanted to cry, not out of fear, but frustration. I had done the right thing. I had gone above and beyond. I had exposed theft, and now I was being treated like a criminal. That's when a message popped onto my screen. From Elise. Subject, private. "Come to the archive room, now. Don't use the elevators. Take the back stairs." My pulse spiked. I grabbed a notebook and walked calmly toward the stairwell. No one followed. Not yet. Elise was waiting, arms folded, standing beneath a dim yellow bulb that made the whole room feel like a spy movie. "What's going on?" I whispered. She handed me a file. Inside, printouts of messages, internal emails, vendor approvals, signature timestamps. Most were mundane, but one thread caught my eye immediately. Subject, LaSalle Invoice Approval. From Procurement Director, Charles Becker. To Accounts Payable Team. Process this quietly. CEO doesn't need to be looped in. Reply. Per your instruction, recurring template saved. My hands went cold. Becker, Alden's former right hand in logistics, and one of the few people who had access to vendor rotations. Elise nodded grimly. "He's the one who flagged you. He's framing me. He's covering himself." I looked up. "Why are you helping me?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I've been here 15 years, and I'm tired of watching good people get crushed under cowards in suits." I closed the file. "What do I do now?" Elise gave me a look I'll never forget. "You do what they don't expect. You survive." That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the office long after the lights had dimmed and the elevators had gone silent, tucked away in the second-floor archive room with nothing but a thermos of coffee, Elise's folder, and my own raw determination. I wasn't going to let Charles Becker ruin me. I wasn't going to be another name scratched onto that hidden desk drawer list. Amanda, Patricia, Susan, Lila. No, If he wanted a war, he picked the wrong secretary. With Elise's help, I pieced together a timeline. 6 months ago, LaSalle Renovations had signed a one-time maintenance contract for minor electrical work. 3 weeks later, a nearly identical invoice appeared, this time routed through a different approver. Then another, and another. The amounts were small, almost invisible, spread thin enough to dodge suspicion. But the approving name? Charles Becker's appeared again and again. He'd been cycling the payments through multiple departments, tweaking project titles and dates. And Alden? He hadn't been on a single CC, which made it clear. Charles knew exactly what he was doing, and he had no intention of stopping until I stumbled in. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles above me. What would Alden do with this? He already knew I'd uncovered something. But this was bigger than a few duplicate charges. This was embezzlement, and the person behind it wasn't just some mid-tier manager. He was someone Alden trusted, or used to. The clock read 2:14 a.m. when I finally printed my findings. All of it. Emails, invoice screenshots, payment logs, and the internal memo where Charles had explicitly requested to keep processing vendor work through Q3 without executive review. I clipped the pages together and slid them into a red folder, the same color I used to code urgent on Alden's calendar. And then I made a second copy, just in case. At 7:58 a.m., I placed the folder on Alden's desk. He hadn't arrived yet. I knew the risk. This wasn't an FYI. It was a bomb. And when it went off, it would change everything. Either I would walk out of this office with my credibility scorched and my name blacklisted across half the city, or I would be the woman who finally forced this company to wake up. Alden arrived 2 minutes later. He didn't notice the folder at first, just grunted a "morning," then started flipping through emails on his phone. I sat at my desk, heart racing. Then he stopped, saw it, picked it up, opened the cover. The air shifted. 10 seconds passed, then 20. Then he slowly lowered the folder, closed it, and looked at me with eyes like steel cutting through fog. "When did you find this?" "Last night. Elise helped. She risked a lot." He didn't blink. "Do you realize who this implicates?" "Yes." "And you're sure?" "Every document is verified. I double-checked the logs myself." He stood, walked to his door, paused, then turned to me and said quietly, "Come with me." He didn't take me to his office. He took me to the 34th floor, an executive-only space I had never seen before, sleek and quiet like the inside of a very expensive watch. We stepped into a glass-walled conference room. Inside, 3 board members already waiting. Harold Whitaker, of course, was among them. He looked up as I entered and sneered like he'd smelled something sour. "What is she doing here?" he asked. Alden dropped the red folder on the table. "This is why." He opened it slowly, methodically, laying each page out in sequence. Harold's expression shifted from smug to blank to furious. "What is this?" "Proof that Charles Becker has been diverting company funds through vendor shells," Alden said, voice level, "and that someone on this board authorized those expenditures or turned a blind eye." "I had no idea." Alden held up a hand. "Don't finish that sentence unless you want to perjure yourself." The room went silent. I didn't sit. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Alden was doing the speaking for me, and suddenly, all the power that had once been stacked against me was now behind me. Because in this moment, this precise, shattering moment, the truth was louder than status, and I was no longer the assistant. I was the one who saw what no one else dared to. By the time we left the 34th floor conference room, the air felt thinner. Something had shifted, not just between me and Alden, but in the bones of the company itself. Alden didn't say a word as we rode the elevator down. His jaw was tight, fists clenched at his sides. I could feel the calculation behind his silence. He wasn't just furious. He was preparing to make someone pay. When we reached the 32nd floor, he turned to me just before the elevator doors opened. "Be ready," he said simply. "For what?" But he didn't answer. He walked straight into his office, closed the door, and within minutes, legal was summoned. I returned to my desk. Every eye on the floor turned to follow me. But this time, no one whispered. No snickers, no sideways glances, only silence. Then, Elise appeared. She didn't say anything, just slid a note across my desk. Her handwriting was careful, deliberate. "Check the break room monitor. Now." I stood and walked there, trying to act casual. On the TV screen was a live-streamed announcement from Reeve and Cordell's internal press system. Alden stood at the podium in a navy suit, the company's logo shining behind him. His tone was calm, measured, deadly. "In light of recent internal audits," he said, "we've uncovered evidence of significant misappropriation of company funds involving senior personnel." Gasps in the break room. Someone dropped their coffee cup. Alden continued. "Charles Becker has been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending legal review. As of this morning, he no longer has access to internal systems, vendor contracts, or executive channels." He paused. "And I would like to personally recognize the individual whose diligence brought this to light, Miss Lila Monroe." My heart stopped. He said my name, out loud, on the company record, in front of everyone. "In less than 3 weeks," he continued, "Miss Monroe has demonstrated the level of integrity, precision, and courage that we claim to value in our mission statements. She didn't just do her job, she went beyond it. And because she did, we will now recover over $200,000 in leaked funds and reinforce the standards we've long ignored." A flicker of something broke across his face, too subtle to call pride, but maybe something adjacent. "Let this be the new standard," he said. "Let's stop rewarding silence." The screen cut to black. No applause, just stunned stillness. I turned around slowly. Everyone in the break room was looking at me, and for the first time, not one of them looked through me. Back at my desk, I sat down and stared at the wall. I had no words. None. Then my computer pinged. New calendar invite. Subject, department briefing, executive realignment time. Today, 3:00 p.m. Location, main conference hall. Attendees, executive team plus assistant, Lila Monroe. I blinked. Assistant. Included? That wasn't normal. I stared at the invite, reread it 5 times. And then I knew. Alden wasn't just thanking me. He was bringing me in. At 2:58 p.m., I walked into the conference hall. Dozens of senior staff were already seated, most of them in tailored suits, most of them older than me by at least a decade. And there I was, still wearing my $40 blazer from a thrift shop and boots I'd re-heeled twice. I found a chair in the back, assuming I'd be a silent observer, but Alden spotted me instantly. He pointed to the seat beside him. "Front row." I swallowed hard and moved forward. The meeting began. Alden laid out the new structure for compliance, a total revamp of internal audits, a third-party review of vendor systems. Department heads would no longer approve recurring contracts without cross-verification. At the end of the presentation, he opened the floor, and then he turned to me. "Lila," he said, voice calm, "would you walk them through your discovery process?" I froze. "You want me to?" "Yes. No one's better positioned to explain how the holes were found." Every head in the room turned. I stood, nervous, but clear. I walked them through the pattern. The invoice duplications, the date discrepancies, the layered approvals, and then I added something I hadn't planned. "Charles Becker knew you wouldn't look closely," I said, scanning the room, "because the amounts were small, because the names were familiar, because the system allowed it." Silence, and then one slow, deliberate clap from Elise, then another and another, until the room, quietly, awkwardly, began to applaud. I sat down, my hands trembling. Alden leaned toward me. "Well done." "You really didn't have to make me talk." "I absolutely did." "Was that a test?" He smirked. "No, that was an announcement." "Of what?" "That you're not just my assistant." I stared at him, and he said nothing more. But in that moment, I understood. The twist wasn't just that I had exposed a scandal. The twist was that the woman no one believed in had just become the most important person in the building. There's a strange kind of silence that follows a storm, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, humming quiet of a room still vibrating with the memory of thunder. That was the office on the morning after the briefing. No one said it outright, but the shift was obvious. The nods from senior staff were less patronizing now, more measured, even cautious. The woman they once whispered about at the water cooler was now the one who'd just saved the company from a full-blown scandal. I hadn't changed, but the way they saw me had, and I wasn't sure yet how I felt about that. Because for all the applause and public statements, I knew this world too well. This wasn't a fairy tale where truth alone won the war. This was corporate, where reputations are currencies and influence can dissolve faster than ink. That morning I found a note on my desk. "Lila, don't eat the pastries in the lounge. Friendly gift from Becker's old circle. And you're being watched. Stay sharp." Elise, as always, didn't sugarcoat the reality. Charles Becker may have been exiled, but his allies hadn't vanished. They were still here, still watching, still waiting for me to slip. At 10:07 a.m., Alden called me into his office. He didn't stand, didn't gesture for me to sit, just looked at me across his desk like he was seeing something new, or maybe like he was still trying to decide what I was. "I want to talk about next steps," he said. My stomach twisted. I forced my voice steady. "Next steps? Your trial period ends this Friday." I nodded. I was going to wait until the end of the week, but after what happened in that conference room... He paused. "It no longer makes sense to keep you on a trial anything." I blinked. "You're not firing me? For uncovering a $200,000 embezzlement operation? No, Monroe, I'm not firing you." "So, I get to stay?" He gave a dry smile. "You get promoted." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. He pushed a document across the desk. New title, Strategic Operations Liaison Salary, much more than I was making. Direct report, Alden Reeve. I stared at it. I stared. "You want me to help run operations?" "I want you to continue doing what you're already doing, seeing what others don't, asking what no one wants to, and making my job harder in the best possible way." I slowly sat down, still staring at the offer. "What if I say no?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Then I'll ask you again tomorrow, and the day after." I smiled. "So you do need me?" "I need someone who tells me the truth even when I don't want to hear it." "And someone who breaks all your filing systems and rearranges your calendar?" You still color code my meetings in shades of sarcasm. I noticed the "can wait until the apocalypse" label yesterday. It was accurate. He chuckled softly, then more seriously. "This company needs a rebuild, not just in structure, in culture. I want you to help me do that." I looked down at the offer letter again and signed. The promotion came with a new desk, closer to Alden's office, but no longer directly outside it. It also came with whispers. This time, not from the lower ranks, but from the old guard. She's dangerous. She made Reeve look weak. Give it 6 months. I heard all of it. Pretended not to, because now I had leverage. Not just a seat at the table, but a voice they couldn't ignore. Still, the real test wasn't the promotion. It came later that week at an executive dinner Alden insisted I attend. It was held at a private rooftop club. Glass walls, jazz trio, skyline views so beautiful it made you forget how expensive everything was. I wore black, sleek, simple. No red, no accidents, no scenes. But even dressed in neutrality, I was a spotlight. As soon as I walked in, the room shifted. People turned, paused their conversations, assessed me like I was a foreign investment. And then, out of the sea of polished smiles, came Harold Whitaker. Of course, the man who tried to cut me down before the board. He approached with a champagne glass in one hand and a look of performative charm in the other. "Miss Monroe," he said, emphasizing Miss like it was a flaw. "Still rewriting the rules, I see." "Just reading the ones you all pretend don't exist," he chuckled tightly. "Alden's lucky. Very few assistants know how to wield power as gracefully as you do." I sipped my water. I'm not his assistant anymore. He blinked, just once. It was enough. Later that night, as the guests thinned and the rooftop began to breathe again, Alden walked over with 2 drinks and a look that was more relaxed than I'd ever seen. "Whitaker corner you?" Briefly, I survived. I knew you would. We leaned against the glass railing, the wind tugging gently at my sleeves. "Why me?" I asked softly. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was everything. He glanced at me. "You asked that once during your interview. I didn't have an answer then, but now I do." I waited. He didn't look away. Because when the building was quiet and everything that was rotten started to rise to the surface, you didn't freeze. You asked questions. You paid attention. And when you saw something broken, you didn't pretend it wasn't your problem. He raised his glass. "To inconvenient miracles." I clinked mine softly against his, and somewhere between the skyline and the silence, I realized this wasn't the end of the storm. This was the beginning of a new forecast. And this time, I was the one writing the weather report. I thought the hard part was over. I thought once Becker was gone, once Alden promoted me, once the lies were exposed and swept into the corporate dustbin, things would settle. They didn't. Truth shakes things loose, yes, but it also makes enemies. Quiet ones. People who smiled when Alden introduced me at the department briefing, who clapped politely during my speech, but whose eyes burned with something I'd come to recognize. Threat. To them, I wasn't a colleague. I was a disruption, an outsider who had the audacity to not wait her turn. And the worst part? Some of them had known about Becker, or at least suspected, but they kept their heads down, and now they resented that I hadn't. My calendar filled up overnight, not with congratulatory lunches or team collaborations, but with check-ins, feedback syncs, and meetings where no one took notes. But everyone watched me closely. In one particularly awkward session, the head of internal communications, Valerie, a woman who always wore taupe and spoke in ellipses, said this to my face. "We've noticed a bit of intensity in your approach." "Intensity?" I repeated. "You're very visible. Some people are uncomfortable with how fast your role has evolved." "You mean because I didn't wait 5 years to be ignored?" Her smile tightened. "We're simply suggesting you take a lighter touch. A lighter touch wouldn't have exposed $200,000 in fraud." The room went quiet. Eventually she closed her notebook and said, "Well, you certainly have convictions." And that was the message, wrapped in civility, translated clearly, Know your place. I didn't tell Alden everything. Not yet, because deep down, I needed to know I could stand on my own, that I hadn't become strong just because someone powerful stood beside me, but because something inside me had finally stopped apologizing. So I fought back in my own way, in documents, in decisions, in the way I started speaking in meetings, clear, measured, without apology. I wasn't loud. I was undeniable. And slowly, the whispers started to shift again, from resentment to respect, not from everyone, but from enough. Because the thing about fear is, it spreads fast. But so does truth, especially when it walks in heels and carries backup copies of every contract. Elise remained my anchor. She showed up at my desk each Monday with a chocolate bar and a calendar of company gossip she claimed she didn't care about, but somehow knew in alarming detail. "This week's drama," she said one morning, dropping into the chair beside me, "is that procurement is pretending Becker never existed. They scrubbed his name off the group email lists." I blinked. "They what?" "Gone. Like he was Voldemort." I snorted. "He who submitted duplicate invoices." Elise grinned, then her expression shifted. "I've seen a lot of people come and go in this company. You're the first one who actually bent the arc. They won't forget that." "They'll try," I muttered. "Let them. What matters is you didn't play their game. You made them play yours." I looked at her, warmth pressing behind my ribs. "Thank you for never letting me doubt myself." She shrugged. "You would have gotten there eventually. I just kept the wolves from biting too soon." And she had, in more ways than I could ever repay. But I planned to try. That Friday, Alden called a surprise meeting. Only a handful of people were invited: compliance, legal, operations, and me. The room was quiet when he entered, flanked by 2 legal consultants in gray suits. He didn't sit, just looked around the table and said, "We're doing a full culture audit." Gasps, actual gasps. Alden Reeve, the man who once believed process was perfection, now wanted to open the company from the inside out. He nodded to me. "Miss Monroe will be leading the qualitative review team." Another wave of stunned silence. And then it hit me. I wasn't just being trusted. I was being asked to lead change from within. That day, I walked out of the conference room with a new title informally circulating in whispers. Not assistant, not even operations, but something far more dangerous. Reeves Fixer. By Monday morning, my inbox had mutated into a battlefield. Anonymous tips, meeting requests, complaints masked as concerns. Some praising me, others politely disguised threats wrapped in professionalism. The culture audit had barely been announced, and already the resistance was organizing. They weren't stupid. They knew what was coming. People who had hidden behind procedures and polished job titles for years were finally being asked what they actually did, and who they answered to when no one was watching. For some, it was exhilarating. For others, it was terrifying. And in the middle of it all stood me. Lila Monroe, the woman who used to fetch coffee. Now leading conversations about accountability, transparency, and toxic management patterns in a building that had never been asked to name those things out loud. I had one-on-one interviews with every department over the next 2 weeks. Most were civil, some were tense. But one was explosive. It was with Richard Langdon, the head of procurement, Becker's former ally. From the moment he sat down, arms crossed and eyes cold, I knew what I was in for. "I assume this is all theater," he said flatly. "Optics." "I assume you know why you're here." I replied just as calmly. I'm here because you made a mess. I blinked. I uncovered fraud. You embarrassed the company. No, I said. Becker did that. I just held up the mirror. He stood up. You think this little rise you're having will last? They always forget. People like you. People like me? His eyes narrowed. The temporary ones. The noisemakers. You come in, play the hero, and vanish. I stood too, and without raising my voice, I said, Not this time. He stormed out, but not before I caught the flicker of something behind his bluster. Fear. That afternoon, Alden called me into his office again. He was reviewing notes from the audit. Half of them highlighted behaviors that had festered under decades of unchallenged authority. When I started this company, he said quietly, I thought process would protect it, that if I built clean systems, the right people would rise. And now? He looked up at me, eyes heavier than usual. Now I know that systems without accountability just create shadows. He closed the folder. What you're doing, it matters more than you realize. I hesitated. Do you regret it? Hiring you? He shook his head slowly. No, I regret every year I spent surrounded by people who didn't tell me the truth. He paused. Then, that ends now. And I believed him. Because for the first time since walking through his door, I didn't just feel seen. I felt trusted. The next morning, a memo went out across the entire company. Subject: Final Findings, Internal Culture Audit. Signed by CEO Alden Reeve and Strategic Ops Liaison Lila Monroe. The memo didn't name names, but it didn't need to. It made one thing clear. Reeve and Cordell was changing, and everyone would be held accountable. No more unchecked authority, no more ghost invoices, no more pretending not to see. Some people resigned, some were removed quietly. But the biggest shock came 2 days later, when Harold Whitaker submitted his formal resignation from the board. No public statement, no farewell party, just a sentence in the HR portal, effective immediately. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I celebrated it, but because I realized the truth. Sometimes justice doesn't come in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, when the people who always assumed they'd win finally lose the power to decide what happens next. That evening, Elise and I sat in the break room. It was empty for once. She handed me a chocolate bar. No card this time? She shook her head. You've graduated, I laughed. Does it feel different? She asked. Which part? Being the woman they listen to now. I thought for a moment. It feels earned. She nodded, then leaned closer. They won't admit it, but you did something they'll be talking about for years. I smiled softly. Good, let them remember. Because I wasn't just rewriting my place in this company. I was redefining what power could look like, and I was just getting started. 3 months passed. The desks in procurement were filled with new faces. HR policies had been rewritten from scratch. The Vendor Review Board, now co-chaired by Compliance and Strategic Ops, ran monthly internal audits with full transparency. And for the first time since I walked into Reeve and Cordell, the company didn't feel like a polished machine hiding rot beneath the gears. It felt real. Not perfect, but rebuilding. I had a nameplate on my new desk now, Lila Monroe, Strategic Operations. It made people pause when they walked by. Sometimes I still caught them looking at me like I didn't belong. But they didn't say it out loud anymore. Because somewhere between the chaos and the truth, I had earned something stronger than titles. I had earned presence. Elise came by every Tuesday with the same smirk and a rotating selection of baked goods she insisted weren't bribes. "Legal's trying to poach you," she said one morning. "Again?" "They want you in policy design," I laughed. "They don't even like me." "They don't have to like you. They just need to admit you're 10 times better at spotting loopholes than anyone with a law degree." "Flatter me more," she grinned. "I'll send your rate card to finance." The truth was, offers had started to come in from other departments, from other firms, even from a startup that offered me equity and a flexible schedule if I'd help design their internal systems from scratch. But I wasn't ready to leave, not yet, because there was one thing still unfinished, and his name was Alden Reeve. Alden had changed, too. Not dramatically, not loudly, but he no longer closed his office door the moment meetings ended. He stopped snapping at junior staff. He even occasionally joined the team for lunch. But the biggest shift wasn't in how he acted. It was in how he listened. He called me into strategy sessions. He asked for my opinion before making big moves. And when I disagreed, he didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned in. We'd begun working on a long-term restructure, something that would outlast both of us. And during one particularly late-night session, surrounded by charts and empty coffee cups, he finally asked the question I hadn't expected to hear from him. "Why didn't you leave?" I looked up from the whiteboard. "What do you mean?" "After everything. The HR trap, the boardroom shade, the passive-aggressive notes. You could have walked away the moment your name cleared." I was quiet for a moment, then answered honestly, "Because I wasn't here to be liked." "Then why?" "Because I knew what it felt like to be underestimated. And I saw that in this company, there were 100 people just like me, smart, capable, invisible, and I wanted to make sure that after me, no one had to be the first one to speak up alone." He didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there, watching me. Then quietly, "You know you've changed everything." I shook my head. "No, I just lit the match. The rest of you decided to stop pretending it wasn't dark." Later that week, I walked past the desk where it all began, my first tiny station outside his office door. It was empty now. No chair, no pens, just a plaque that read, "Reserved for Strategic Ops Overflow." But I remembered the exact feeling of sitting there, typing with shaky fingers, pretending I belonged. And now I didn't have to pretend. The next morning, I received a company-wide email that made my throat catch. Subject: Upcoming Q4 Summit, Keynote Speaker. Announcement: Body: We are proud to announce that this year's keynote at the Reeve and Cordell Leadership Summit will be delivered by Lila Monroe, Strategic Operations Liaison. I read the words 3 times, then once more out loud, just to be sure they were real. A keynote, me. The girl who spilled coffee during her interview and signed her first HR form in the wrong place. The girl who everyone thought wouldn't last a week, now standing in front of the entire company as a voice of change. I closed my laptop, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself breathe. Not because I had arrived, but because I had become. The day of the Leadership Summit arrived with the kind of quiet nerves that don't show on your face, but settle deep in your bones. I wore a black blazer, a soft gray blouse, and a pair of boots that had carried me through everything. Interviews, all-nighters, office politics, victories, threats, breakthroughs. My hair was tied back. No red lipstick, no distractions. Just me. I stood backstage, watching the rotating screens flash company milestones, product launches, market expansions, awards, charts, headlines. But the real transformation? That wasn't on the slides. It was walking around the room. The interns now had seats at the center tables. The newest hires weren't hiding at the back, they were invited forward. And for the first time ever, the summit didn't just look like a celebration of profit, it looked like a celebration of people. I breathed in deep. Then someone touched my shoulder. Alden. He looked at me, calm, steady. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. "You?" He gave a half smile. "Not even close." We shared a quiet moment of amusement. Then I stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, but not blinding. Rows of faces stared back. Some I knew, many I didn't. And for a second, the old voice returned. "They're waiting for you to mess up." But then I remembered. They'd been waiting for that since day one. And I was still here, still standing, still rising. I took the mic, cleared my throat, and began. When I first came to Reeve and Cordell, I was 26, late to my interview, and convinced I'd be fired before lunchtime. A ripple of laughter. But I wasn't. Instead, I stayed, not because I fit the mold, but because I broke it. I scanned the room. The truth is, I didn't have a 5-year plan. I didn't go to the Ivy Leagues. I wasn't groomed for this world. More silence. But I saw what others didn't. I asked the questions no one wanted to ask. And I refused to believe that power only belonged to the people who had always had it. And then softer. You see, companies don't break because of one bad person. They break in silence, in the moments when we look away, when we decide it's not our job to care. I let that hang in the air. But culture isn't set by rules. It's set by courage. And courage doesn't come from position. It comes from conviction. Another pause. 3 months ago, this company faced a choice: preserve comfort or pursue truth. And the reason we're here today, stronger, clearer, and better, is because we chose the second. I finished with the only words that mattered. I wasn't hired to change everything. I just refused to believe that I couldn't. The applause didn't erupt. It built, slow, grounded, and then unshakable. A standing ovation. I stood there not proud but anchored, because I knew this wasn't just my win. It was a door, opened and held, for every voice that had once been told to wait their turn. That evening, as the building cleared and the city lights blinked awake below us, Alden and I stood side by side near the rooftop railing. The wind brushed softly through the silence. "You meant every word," he said, looking out across the skyline. "I did." He nodded, then added, "You know this place won't stay perfect." "It never was." He gave a low laugh. "Fair." "But it's better," I said. "And it'll keep getting better, because now there are people inside it who know they have a voice." He looked at me, not like a boss, not even like a mentor, but like an equal. "You changed the rhythm," he said, "not just of this company, of me." That stopped me. "You?" I used to believe control was strength, that silence meant stability. But you proved that challenge is where truth lives. I didn't say anything at first. Then, softly, "I'm not going anywhere, you know." I wasn't worried. We stood there a little longer, 2 figures silhouetted in the city's hum, and I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the end of their version of me, the one who didn't belong, the one who wouldn't last, the one they called a mistake. Because now I wasn't a misfit. I was a force,